Tharja is a Plegian Dark Mage who joins Chrom and his army in their effort to defeat King Gangrel and save Lady Emmeryn. After recruiting her, it won't take long to realize that she's obsessed about Robin. She's a total stalker, following them everywhere, paying attention to literally every single thing they do, and thinking about them even in her other support conversations. She's also generally pretty weird, antisocial, unfriendly, selfish, manipulative. Such personality traits seem problematic in a game that highly values friendship and marriage. How then can a woman so unfriendly and cold, and whose heart is seemingly dedicated only to Robin, able to work in a game like this? Tharja isn't a good person. Her supports tend to begin with her partner approaching her, usually with her responding in a dismissive manner. She threatens to stab Vake after he tries to flirt with her, completely dismisses Gregor the second their C support starts, and coldly tells Libra to stop bothering her in their C support as well. On the flip side, whenever she's the one approaching her partners in the C support, it's almost always out of self-interest, like when she makes Donald her literal errand boy to fetch ingredients for hexes for her. Basically, she's usually out in camp following her agenda with little regard for anyone else. Especially when it comes to dark magic. She will not hesitate to use her allies as test subjects for her latest curses on a whim. On the cursing topic, she tends to threaten her partners too with hexes to get her way with them. She hexes Stahl and Henry only to tell her the truth or to die in a horribly painful manner. The list actually goes on, but I want to finish this video in a timely manner. Tharja isn't a kind woman most of the time, and usually doesn't want to interact with others if she has nothing to gain from them. As it stands, she's like the antithesis of the themes of companionship and bonds that Awakening strives to underscore. It prompts an important question. Does she deserve to even belong in this cast? Well, yes, I very much believe so. First off, despite being antisocial and openly mean to her comrades, her loyalty is still to them and to Chrom. With Stahl, she insists that she's always been loyal to him. With Frederick, she feels bad enough to mention that he could tell Chrom about her invisibility hex that she cast on him, causing him to get himself injured, and was even willing to take punishment for her actions. In addition to her loyalty to not only Robin, she has a well-established sense of justice. Her motivation might be to throw fireballs at the bad guys, but she can clearly discern what is evil and what is good. With Stahl, she outlines why she joined and why she continues to fight. You thought I might be a Plegian spy? Yes, I figured as much. But you should know that I never liked that dastard Gangrel. What kind of king would sacrifice his realm to suit his own twisted goals? It's a travesty he ever took the throne. Tharja is disgusted by Gangrel's actions, neglecting Plegia and its people and throwing innocent lives away in his twisted pursuit to take the Fire Emblem. While this motivation may seem contradictory at first, given that she simultaneously denounces Gangrel's selfish actions but also routinely acts selfishly by putting her allies under hexes for her own gain, I would argue that these are obviously two different things. Gangrel had no regard for his own innocent people. Tharja does not come very close to acting like this. In fact, she does the opposite. In her B support with Vake, she is found alone, dwelling on the innocent lives that she could have saved if she did more in the last battle. She even tends to Frederick's and Virion's wounds after the battle because they protected her, which is one of the reasons why she is here. She wants to fight Gangrel's injustice, wants to be close to Robin, wants to fight alongside Chrom and the Shepherds, but also just wants to fight people. She has peculiar ways of showing her loyalty, but that's just who Tharja is. We also need to consider how her upbringing plays a role in her personality too. It is revealed with Rickon and Henry that Tharja clearly takes a lot of pride in being a dark mage. In her C support with Henry, she suspects that his happy-go-lucky attitude is a ploy to trick her. She threatens him for not telling him what he's up to, but after he just explains that he's a fancy-free kind of guy, she gets upset. Hail, Hardy, have you no respect for our ancient profession? We're supposed to be harbingers of pestilence and famine and doom. Tharja believes that she has a duty to be the embodiment of a practitioner of ancient magic. The dark personality, the edginess, the creepiness, all things that contribute to this image. She even tells Rickon not to tell anyone about her friendliness towards him as she has an image to protect. This is not to say that this is all some act, because it's not. Tharja is genuinely creepy and mean, and there's no way that Tharja can be described as a morally good person. She's not a good person, but she's capable of doing good deeds. And she's also able to grow as a person and become a better woman. That much is at least true. Tharja has goodness in her heart, which consistently rises the deeper and deeper she gets with her support partners. Upon seeing the tragedies deep within the hearts and minds of her comrades, she will feel sorrow and pity for them. In other words, Tharja is a sympathetic character. Most characters in the Awakening cast are sympathetic though. They're mostly all humane enough to recognize the sadness of their allies and will try to help them out of it. The difference between Tharja and say Robin or Lissa is that Tharja's sympathetic range is very small because she's very difficult to relate to and isn't a very nice person at first glance. But this is what I find so interesting and unique about her. She's so unrelatable and unfriendly that when those few moments of sympathy for others appear, it shows us a side of Tharja that values friendship, companionship, and romance. A good starting point on the subject is her support conversations with Lon'qu. In their C support, Lon'qu gets apprehensive when Tharja tries to get a bug out of his hair. Tharja begins to suspect that his fear of women is actually a curse, and she offers to release it from him. Lon'qu rejects the idea, but after she leaves the scene, he dwells on her proposition. In B, he approaches her and wonders if she can truly release him from his fear of women. She of course can, but to do so, she tells him that she needs to know exactly where the fear came from. Lon'qu hesitates, but begins his story. He couldn't rescue his childhood girlfriend Carrie from a bandit attack, and she ended up being killed, saving him. Tharja sympathizes with him, and then makes a keen observation. It is not unusual for powerful incidents to grip our hearts for many years after. You aren't crushed by mortal means. The memory is the curse. Tharja doubles down on her offer to help him though. She says it will take time as she must learn about him, his lover, and his childhood past. Despite the added difficulty of now needing to know about so many details of Lon'qu's life, and now needing to prepare for a difficult ritual, she still wants to help him. Tharja ends up playing the role of a guidance counselor off-screen. She's been learning everything about him, his relationship with Carrie, and the memories of his past. By their A support, Lon'qu decides not to go through with the ritual as Tharja explains that the trauma is so deep that he would lose all of his childhood memories in the process. He realizes that these memories made him the man he is today, and thanks her for her help. The B and A support illustrate that Tharja can use dark magic for good. It also shows that she becomes more attached to Lon'qu as the chain continues. At first, she merely offers to help, then leaves. Then she has a candid conversation with him, and continues to offer help. Between B and A, she's listening to Lon'qu's story. Discovering the darkness in his heart draws Tharja closer to Lon'qu, and as a result, changes the way she sees him. Witnessing Libra's trauma gives Tharja similar feelings of sympathy and care. The support chain is pretty uninteresting until their B, where he volunteers himself as a test subject for Tharja's new in-progress spell that can change memories. As he focuses on his desire to be granted a loving memory of his parents caring for him, she is full-on exposed to the darkness in Libra's soul. Libra sees that she is very curious about the potential to tap into that darkness for her pursuit of knowledge, and so he continues to be her assistant, despite the dangers of going back to that place again. Once they start testing again in their A support, Tharja ends up seeing what that darkness really is. Tharja discovered that Libra was abandoned as a child because his parents thought he was possessed by demons. The isolation and hatred plagued him until he found solace in becoming a priest. Libra immediately feels like his burden has gotten much lighter after someone else was finally able to see everything that plagued him for so long. Tharja's magic was therapeutic. Now that he can share his pain with someone else, it's as if Tharja became a guidance figure for him. After telling him that her pursuit of knowledge with him was finished, she simply suggests that he focuses on being happy, now that he can look at life without all the pain dragging him down. Tharja was able to see absolutely everything about him without him needing to come forward about it himself. But for Tharja to not just learn that Libra was abandoned by his parents, but to understand why it happened is a unique conversation just between these two characters. Tharja learns all she can with him, but instead of dismissing him like he was simply a tool for her, she treats him with dignity and care, telling him to embrace his newfound happiness. Tharja getting closer and closer to her allies as the chain progresses is obviously nothing new to the formula of supports, and trying to argue that Tharja is redeemable because these things happen isn't the point I'm trying to argue here. Her sympathy for others and her deeds to help them are the catalysts which drive Tharja towards them. In the S support with Lon'qu, she offers companionship instead of magic to help him overcome his fear, to be there for each other in times of need, day in and day out. Then she literally spells it out for him, to get married. Her S support with Libra has her peering into his heart once more and being exposed to his feelings of love for her. Tharja, feeling romantic love for him in such a profound and unexpected way, suspects it might be a trick, but ultimately follows her heart and marries him. To a lesser extent, after helping Gregor overcome his guilt about losing his brother by becoming a conduit for him to communicate with him in the afterlife, she is unable to stop thinking about him, and in their S support, follows her heart again and settles down. Tharja gets attached to others the more she can relate to them mind to mind, and the more she's exposed to the darkness of her partners. It's as she observes with Vake. She at first dismisses him entirely because she only thinks of him as a buffoon, but once he sympathizes with her, she realizes that he's actually pretty wise. The more she can feel for her allies in some way, the more attached she becomes, and as a result, the stronger that bond is. Take her support with Noe for example. The C support starts out with Tharja wanting clippings of Noe's talents to conduct divinations. As an exchange, Noe requests that she tells her how her parents are doing. In the B support, Tharja finds out that her parents are dead, but tries not to tell her the reality so as not to make Noe upset. And in A, Tharja reaches out to her as she's found alone crying over her parents. She is very kind-hearted here. She tries to be at her side, tells her that her future is full of laughter and cheer, and that it's only going to get better. This support shows that Tharja is kind when she wants to be. Even though Noe keeps telling her that she's tough and strong enough to accept the truth, and that she's a grown woman, the reality is that she isn't. Noe can't even admit that they're dead, but just that they are far away. Tharja is mindful of Noe's temperament and does what she can to be her friend, similar to how she does it with Lon'qu. Personally, I think Tharja being nicer than usual has more to do with the fact that Noe isn't just a fellow girl in the army, but because she understands that Noe is indeed a young girl at heart, who clearly values family just like her. Libra, Lon'qu, Gregor, and Noe's supports present Tharja as a foil for these characters to overcome their trauma. They also show how compassionate Tharja can be, and in regards to marriage, I think her motivations are pure, despite dropping Robin's name in 2 of them, but Robin is another topic for this video that I will get into later. To put it simply, Tharja is attracted to people who she can relate with on a mental level. It's most strong with these 4 individuals here, but this observation is also valid in her other romantic supports. After Tharja uses magic to see how Kellum's brother is doing after he became a refugee, Kellum finds out that he's going to be an uncle, which makes Tharja giggle. Then in their S support, Tharja gives Kellum a lucky charm she made to give to his nephew. These are 2 innocent and genuinely nice things we see her do. Even though she tells Kellum that the gift isn't a big deal, it at the very least shows that she is considerate. I also think that her smiling over Kellum's news, and her concern over her own parents in their C support, and in Noe's entire chain, show that she has family values. And I suspect that part of the reason why I personally like this support is because they share a common value in family. She's attracted to Stahl because she finds his modesty and honesty charming. She's attracted to Gaius because he's a bad boy. Vake because he's surprisingly spiritual and sympathetic to her. Frederick because she finds him a very sweet man. Henry because they're 2 peas in a pod. These S supports, as forced as they are in Awakening, at the very least show Tharja proposing or accepting marriage for some genuinely nice and honest reason. Perhaps not to the degree of the first 4, but it's still there. However, her romance with Donal and Virion aren't motivated for a similar nice or honest way. Tharja's, dare I say, most evil supports show a Tharja who consciously marries motivated mostly out of self-interest, using her partner to pursue her own goals, seemingly more than anything else. In her and Virion's C and B support, she's casting hexes on him to get him to do her bidding. It first starts out pretty minor, with Tharja making him think he's a cat and then making him sleep, but progresses into him actually doing tasks for her, like remodeling the barracks, cooking for the camp, and building a bridge. It turns out that Tharja's hexes weren't working, and Virion was just doing what she wanted because he simply finds it impossible to say no to a beautiful woman. Reading through the support chain, there is absolutely no chemistry going on between these 2. Even after Virion explains his backstory of wanting to serve those in the name of his people of Roseanne, she actually tells him that his story doesn't make sense. She isn't into Virion at all. In their S support, while she accepts his proposal of marriage, she has another motive for doing it. She wants him to vow not to sacrifice his life for her, because she has plans for him. Even as Virion disagrees with the improperness of the oath, she tells him that this is what she desires, and if he's to marry her, that's what he needs to do. Tharja's vows are completely out of self-interest. Who knows what exactly Tharja's plans are, but they probably have to do with him being used as an assistant for her to follow her pursuit of knowledge in some capacity. Tharja's treatment of Donnell isn't much better. Throughout C and B, Donnell is fetching ingredients for Tharja's spells. As a return, Tharja casts spells on the camp that relieves them of sicknesses, like a cold that spread around in their A support. The support chain is largely based on this mutual beneficial dynamic. Donnell collects ingredients for Tharja, and she casts spells of whatever he pleases. In their S support, Tharja proposes to him, but not out of a love for him. Instead, she does it so he could swear an oath to remain at her side of being an assistant. She says, "Well, yes, as far as society at large is concerned, we would be wed. However, in practice, I want you to be like more of my personal servant." Tharja proposes to him so he could swear an oath to remain at her side of being an assistant. While you can't really deny that Tharja doesn't have feelings for him, because 1, she basically admits to loving him somehow, and 2, it's an S support and they need to make noir, using marriage as a cover-up to make him swear to be a personal servant of hers is the red flag here. And she certainly doesn't have much chemistry with him either. In these two supports, Tharja is never challenged intellectually like she is with Vake or Henry, or compelled to do something genuinely nice like she is with Kellum or Noe, or exposed to someone else's demons like with Libra or Lonku. Here, she acts completely on her base desire of furthering her own pursuit of knowledge. This is exactly one of the reasons why I find Tharja an interesting character. A lot of how her dynamic with her support partner has to do with what her partner is exposing her to. And while that may not be the most groundbreaking thing to observe of Awakening's characters over the course of 4 conversations, I think it's especially important to understand how Tharja's feelings work since her default personality is so mean. It'd be pretty terribly negligent if I chose not to talk about her obsession with Robin on the topic of romance. Because as most of you are already aware at this point, 2 of these emotionally deeper supports, with Libra and Lonku, ends on a bizarre note. She plugs in her obsession with Robin. With Libra, she calls him now the second most important person in her life, next to Robin. With Lonku, she says that if he refuses her proposal, it would just give her more time to follow Robin around. The injection of her fascination, aka obsession with Robin, is random and bizarre. What business does she have even mentioning it in these instances? It's so inappropriate that Lonku and Libra get visibly thrown off. Unfortunately, I don't have some nuance or fresh take on this. The reality is that if we want to seriously discuss Tharja, concessions just need to be made. Her obsession with Robin is, for all intents and purposes, a cliché. Her motivations for obsessing over Robin are vaguely explained. She explains to Vake that it's a meeting of the minds, and that she's fascinated by them. This explanation wouldn't be so terribly annoyingly vague if we had just something else to work off, but we don't. Meeting of the minds probably has something to do with Robin being the offspring of Valadar / the vessel for Grima or something to be awoken, but that's basically all we have. I don't think it has to do with Robin's signature empathy either. Robin doesn't seem to offer anything characters like Libra don't. I suppose here's a good spot to mention that in the official Japanese-only website that explains some extra lore and backstory to the universe and its characters, Tharja's obsession over Robin came from her having frequent dreams about him, how nice and caring he was to her, but also how naughty at night he was with her. It's not in-game, but even if it was, it would still just reinforce the fact that Tharja is very delusional. What I'm saying is that it's pointless to try to figure out why Tharja is obsessed. She just is. It's pandering for the sake of pandering. That being said, I actually don't think it takes that much away from the supports that she mentions Robin in. Here's why. I'm gonna focus mostly on Libra support because I think that's one of the best she has. First of all, I think this entire support chain is pretty fascinating. Like how it begins with Tharja being her cold and dismissive self, with Libra volunteering himself as an experiment, sparking interest in Tharja as it would. Then through Tharja looking into the darkness in his heart, we get a full-on, no-holds-barred explanation of Libra's backstory, with Tharja clearly showing that sympathy and understanding in full force, ending in her suggesting that he put his newfound happiness to good use. In their S support, Libra flips her logic about when hearts and minds come together, they sometimes change each other, by getting her to see the newfound love in his heart for her which spark the same feelings in the other direction. It's a unique take on the S support. She literally sees feelings and realizes that that's also what she has and acts on those. So yeah, even though it ends on a strange note, I want to recognize that the support itself is a cool one. And look, even though Tharja prioritizes Robin over Libra, her feelings for Libra are nonetheless genuine and pure. I don't think her decision to prioritize Robin over Libra takes anything away from that. It's meant to underscore how delusional she is about them. The fact is, her obsession is on another plane, one that really isn't worth trying to rationalize because the nature of the obsession is irrational. It's redeemable for another reason though, her endings. The only endings where her obsession with Robin remains is if she doesn't marry. In her unpaired ending, it says that her jealous obsession with Robin never subsided. And with Chrom, saying that Tharja kept an unhealthy obsession with Robin that led her to vanish for weeks and months at a time, and of course, Chrom just vanishes. The rest of her endings are exclusively about her and her husband. If intelligence systems really wanted to stay true to the obsession cliche, I feel like they could have given her a gag ending just like Chrom, but they decided not to. Consider the wording as well. Her obsession never subsided. This happened because she remained alone. So with that in mind, I'd argue that the companionship she does end up getting leads her to get over Robin in the future. We can even look at Libra's ending. They built an orphanage together and she appreciated the kids. This is why I argue this point. Tharja's obsessiveness over Robin is redeemable because her love for her husband can conquer it. Now then, the final topic I want to discuss is Tharja's treatment of her daughter, Noir. Arguably the most controversial aspect of Tharja's character is that she's abusive towards her and her father. In her daughter's timeline, Tharja had become bent on avenging her husband. In her goal, she regressed deeper and deeper into the dark arts, and further away from looking after Noir. In her C support with Noir, she notices that her daughter was mimicking her every move, and Noir tells her that she would practice dark magic herself so she could try to help her. In their B support, Tharja tries to perform a hex with her daughter, but fails. Tharja, confused, wonders why her future self wouldn't have taught Noir how to properly curse people, and if she was so caught up in research, why her future self would reject an assistant. The B support ends with her maliciously grinning, saying that she would mold her into something useful, whether she'd like it or not. Fearful of what she will do next, Noir nonetheless vows to do her best. Noir is scared, but is certainly aware of what Tharja actually means, because in her timeline, she would always test her latest hex on her. It was something that Noir clearly did not like. She wants to be useful to Tharja in this current timeline, because it seems like outside of being a guinea pig, she didn't matter. Their A support reflects this, as she tells Tharja that she'll make a useful assistant after collecting all the implements needed for a hex. But Tharja turns down the hex session and tells her to put the implements away. She explains, "I think I've come to understand the motives of my future self. I don't want you dealing in hexes. The dark arts carry with them tremendous risks. My future self knew as much." The future Tharja understands the risks involved with practicing dark magic. In Fire Emblem, and especially in Awakening's universe, dark magic is quite corrosive to the mind and spirit. Henry and Rickon's Harvest Scramble conversation really puts this into perspective. Henry first describes using dark magic like buying something very expensive and feeling very good that you can enjoy it. Then he talked about how dark magic makes everything painted black. Whether it's good or bad, one just feels powerful. And the rush of defeating an enemy with dark magic is like nothing else. Then, after exposing Rickon to it, Henry says that to feel gloomy and depressed is natural, and that it does take time to get used to. Remember when I made that joke that black magic is basically like cocaine?
It turned out that Nurgle was actually the twins' dad and he needed to save them in the past, but he needed an ancient dark power to do that. The darkness took over his body and made him go crazy. He then only lusted for power and the dragons were basically his big ticket for it. He needed his kids' dragon stones and life force to open the gate, control the dragons, and take over the world because dark magic is basically like cocaine. Also, Ninian and Ellie would get married in the Everoy. The end.
It is definitely similar here, but more detail is put into how it affects the mind. It's addictive. You want to keep using it once you have it. It feels cathartic to use, and you want it in masses. You can lose yourself in it. your morality and sense of self can just vanish. And considering that Tharja and Henry have literally surrounded themselves in this since birth, it's no wonder why Tharja didn't want Noir to follow the same path she did. Dark magic isn't safe. Present Tharja now understands the actions of future Tharja and follows the same path. However, this doesn't really show any significant development of present Tharja's character, because while she recognizes the dangers of using dark magic and doesn't want Noir to become like her, she nonetheless torments her own daughter in the present day. She abuses Noir with hexes, and when the father tries to talk Tharja out of it, he ends up getting hexed on. Let's jump to the father support. Their B support ends with Noir miserable. My coming back didn't change you, father, so why should it change anything? It'll all happen again. My parents will die, and I'll be left alone. Why did I even bother coming back if it means watching my life fall apart again? Usually father supports are better left unmentioned, as the fathers are all forced into the exact same conversation, sometimes making some male characters act completely out of character to suit the conversation. It's no exception here. First of all, hexes don't work on Virion. Frederick would never subject himself, and especially his daughter, to this kind of treatment, and Henry can even deflect curses. So yes, usually it's safe to just avoid the father supports, but Tharja is an unfortunate exception because Noir's father support has everything to do with her. It stops making the father support safe to avoid as it tries to incorporate Tharja too. Not just that, but it puts Tharja into the limelight without her even being there. This forces us to not be able to omit this support in the discussion with Tharja, and given that it's a support about how Tharja abuses her family, it paints her in a terrible light. Not to digress too much, but I also find this setup even more terrible because it throws away every single interesting dynamic that Tharja ever had with her husbands and funnels them all into one thing about Tharja's behavior, negating a lot of what made Tharja's interactions with others in the first place interesting. This support is one of the most poorly written and structured supports in the game. Tharja is morally obtuse. She clearly values her own family and wants one of her own. She sees the unfairness of her treatment to them, and Noir especially, but still mistreats them anyway. The tragic irony being that she doesn't want to corrupt her own daughter, but still ends up being the reason why Noir is so damaged and meek in the first place. Consequently, her merely recognizing the actions of her future self doesn't contribute to any meaningful development. It's like I said at the very beginning. She's not a good person, but she's capable of doing good things. The father A support ends on a better note than how it started, with the father taking initiative and stealing Tharja's implements, a move so bold and loving that Noir cheers up and optimistically wonders if things can really change for the better, not before seeing her father run away in a panic from a frenzied and vengeful mother off-screen. While it's easy to brush off the support as a presentation of how terrible Tharja is, I think it is very productive to also realize that it ends on a positive note. Noir desperately wants to leave her past behind and to live happily with her parents. The optimistic end is telling of that desire coming true. While it leaves a lot to be desired, we can at the very least hope things do in fact get better for her. Namely being that Tharja realizes the folly in her logic and stops treating her own family like canvases for her experiments. And given that her paired endings are mostly positive, I'm willing to give Tharja the benefit of the doubt that she doesn't regress into her future self, and instead become someone who treats her family with dignity and respect. To end this video, I'd like to digress just a little bit. Tharja is a character who was created with fan service in mind. The raspy, seductive voice, the inexplicable yandere cliché, having the nicest body in the army, these are things in her base game. That said, it feels like Intelligence Systems' plan for Tharja worked, and over time we saw much more provocative official artwork, figurines, and DLC. These are things she obviously cannot control, so I hope that this video helped some folks begin to view Tharja as a more legitimate character with traits, habits, and purpose, as opposed to just a fan service machine. The idea of making a character who is consciously the antithesis behind the themes of their own game, knowingly does bad things, who isn't empathetic, is no doubt a risk in writing, especially in a game like this. I think Tharja's writing does pull this off though. While at first it feels like she doesn't work at all, if you search deep enough you can find why she's a decent character. She's redeemable, helps her allies, and even contributes to the world's lore by showing us tidbits of Plegia's culture. I feel like discussion about Tharja tends to get bogged down to either condemning her actions, saying she's a badly written character, while she is far from perfect, and whose potential is certainly hampered by Intelligence Systems' agenda. I think they did a solid job at writing a character who isn't meant to be a good person. Obviously, you can't please everyone with a character like this, but unlike Perry, and arguably Camilla, I think they ended up with someone good. Deuces.